The Bill and Kelly Show is recorded at Studio A at Executive Suite Squared in beautiful Hammond, Indiana. Now, here's Bill and Kelly. Hello and welcome to the Bill and Kelly Show. With us today is Frank Mrvan, who is the Democratic candidate for the Congressman of District 1, U.S. Congressional seat District 1. And I got to tell you, we are so honored to have you on our show. This is
I'm honored
a huge honor. Currently, he serves as the North Township trustee in Lake County, which I've got to say, I'm just absolutely amazed every time I look at what services the North Township provides. The folks in that area, whether you are coming from an impoverished area or any need you have, I mean, you've done an amazing job with that township. So what I thought we'd start out with is telling folks that may be new to Indiana, and why don't we talk about Frank and where he came from and how you got into public service.
Okay, so I want to thank Bill and Kelly. You know, you guys have been an institution for some time. We met over a year ago at a very small location in Highland where there was a small little party going on, and you both have a charisma that attracts people to you. So I want to thank you for what you do for the community.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
I think he's talking about you, not me.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a need for what you do. And so we appreciate you bringing the finer things of what's going on in Northwest Indiana to an audience and how hard you work at it. It's nothing that comes natural. You have to work at it. So I appreciate that. A little bit about who I am. Was born and raised in Hammond, Indiana. Lived on Maryland Street. My mom is Jean Mrvan. She was born and raised in East Chicago. My father's Senator Frank Mrvan. He was born and raised in East Chicago. And they live in Hessville, and I went to St. Catherine of Siena grade school for 8 years, and then I went to Bishop Knoll for 1 year, and then I went to Morton and graduated from Morton High School, so I'm a governor.
Now, one thing our audience out there has asked if you can talk a little bit louder.
Oh, absolutely.
When you go to D.C., you're going to have to talk
and
loud.
my voice usually carries. All right, so I
Is that
absolutely
better?
will focus. So Morton High School, and then at Morton High School I met my current wife. She's my high school sweetheart. So Jane Tremble is my wife, Jane Mrvan. We have two daughters, Genevieve and Scarlett. Genevieve is a senior, she's 17, and Scarlett is 13, she's an 8th grader. And you know, I went to Ball State University, have a degree in journalism and communications, minor in political science and communications. When I got out of college, I worked for an environmental company that recycled. Worked for them for 4 or 5 years. Went out to North Carolina, lived in Raleigh, which was the fastest growing city in the country at that time, was in the mortgage industry. Worked my way up from a loan officer to a director of operations. Came back to Northwest Indiana in 2 years later, so in 1999. Worked for a mortgage company. Then worked for Abbott Labs as a pharmaceutical sales rep. I had a cardiovascular drug, and have been in the competitive sales market where you either perform or you get left behind. And it is very result driven, and you have to be able to have very good trusting relationships with credibility that when you're talking about a product, you will fulfill what that product has to say, and you will fulfill any type of promise that you have. Then you're asking me how I got involved in politics, or government and politics, is first and foremost by my father. He's a state senator, has been serving. He's the longest serving state senator in the history of Indiana. He's been a servant leader that has absolutely positively found a way to work in a bipartisan approach to be able to get results. He's a Democrat in the state of Indiana, where he has been in the minority in the Senate for his career. And you know, his formula has always been staying close to people. that you may not agree every single day on every issue, but the fact of the matter is if you show up, have very, very solid, credible relationships, and you tell people the truth, they'll stay with you when they go and vote. And ultimately, that's what I have done. I started off on the North Township Board, made a name for myself by standing up for what was right. 3 years later, I became the North Township Trustee. I've been that for 15 years. And ultimately, if you've just moved here and you don't know what the trustee's office does in the North Township Trustees, we provide services for people who are living on the margins, the most vulnerable of people who have lost their jobs, who can't afford their rent or their mortgage, who need help with their utilities, who need help with food and clothing. When you break upon the basic elements of how you assist people, you work in a collaborative effort. We've done a lot with making sure people have access to mental health, making sure people have access to health care, focusing on obstacles that children may have for being their full potential learners, worked with the school system, worked with Title I, and have just done everything that we could where there is a void to be able to assist people to stabilize their homes. We also do a great deal of work for disaster relief. When the flood came, the North Township Trustees Office led the efforts. When an apartment building burns down, we partner up with the American Red Cross to make sure those individuals stabilize their homes. We've done work with the Catholic Charities on immigration work for Pathway to Citizenships. At the township, we have provided a citizenship class where over 600 people have graduated and become citizens of the United States. We do English as a second language. We do a great deal. We provide transportation with Dial Ride, and we take care of Wicker Park. And so we have a wide scope of what we do, and you know, we have a commercial that says we bring services and people together, and ultimately at the North Township Trustees Office, that's what we do.
Wow, that's quite a gambit of services, I tell you, and that's something that, you know, what we do is try to provide a platform for some of the organizations you work for, the food bank, which I've seen you there. This is a guy that rolls up his sleeves and gets it done. Yeah. So that's something we've always been amazed about. Let's go back to your home life. I think you skipped something very crucial, and when Kelly and I go back, we're going to hear about it. There's one member of the family you did not mention.
Truman?
Truman.
The dog.
He's a dog.
Yes, Truman.
That's awesome.
Yes, so Truman is a golden doodle. He's my best friend. He's loyal, he's protective of the house, he's quiet, but he's loud. So he's a good dog.
See,
and we also have Louie, a guinea pig that everybody loves. I don't have that same connection yet, but I'm doing my best every day.
See, I warned Frank this is going to be a tough interview. We started right off the bat.
It is. Remembering the guinea pig and Truman, those are the tough questions.
We bring out the story here.
Yes.
I warn you right now, we bring out the story. Well, moving on. I mean, that's it. And we know your dad. He's a tremendous public servant. And you've actually partnered with him on a bill and something you are very emotional about. You want to share that with us?
So it's a two-step process, and I forget about the first step sometimes. The first bill that we partnered on, that we worked together on, was in the state of Indiana. There was a statute of limitations for individuals. First of all, let's set the stage. Indiana ranks in the top 5 or 10 of child molestation cases reported in the United States. Now, when you first hear that, you think that that is a horrific statistic, but the fact of the matter is that 90% of those cases go unreported. So it is something that is to be recognized, that when you are reporting it, that's a good thing. But what we have partnered on are two separate pieces of legislation. The first one, which is about 6 years ago, which extended the statute of limitations for individuals who have been assaulted or molested in their home. Very often it goes years and years and years after someone has left the home before they're reported, and from the time of incident, that statute of limitations would run out. And so about 6 years ago, we worked on a piece of legislation that would be 7 years from the date you move out, or 7 years from when you're 25 years old. And so that extended the statute of limitations. There was an advocacy group for survivors that pushed that bill throughout the United States. We were able to pick up on it, and we were able to garner support to be able to pass that bill. Then secondly, what we were able to do is we put together at the North Township Trustee's office, I'm going to tie everything together. Very often, if people are incapable of working, it's because of childhood trauma. And very often, if there's childhood trauma, people try and drown those feelings and they turn to alcohol and drugs. Or if they face obstacles, it is very challenging for them to overcome it. So when you want to break the chain of poverty, you have to really do a deep dive in order to figure out what is the cause of that. So you partner that up with personal experiences that we have had in my intimate family. My wife is a survivor. She wanted to be able to make a difference in the community. She wanted to make sure that parents and teachers and trusted adults were having the conversations with children to be able to empower them and educate them to know that if someone is pushing boundaries or asking them to keep a secret, or if they have an icky feeling when they're talking to someone, that there's trusted adults that they can turn to. So we put a collaborative effort together, which was Fairhaven, which is the Rape Crisis Center, the North Township Trustee's Office, the Northwest Indiana Times, which did stories and editorials for over 8 weeks of survivors telling their stories. And we also partnered up with the U.S. District Attorney's Office and David Kapp. And that relationship talked about internet safety, and it talked about phone safety, because a lot of human trafficking is what's going on the internet. A definition of that is someone's on social media, someone lures a child into a conversation, says, if you come meet me here, X, Y, and Z, we'll have a cell phone for you, or we'll have something. And that child gets lured, and then it gets trafficked to a different city or a different state. And to prevent that, to be able to educate kids about how predators push boundaries, we went to the schools and we had a curriculum. And that curriculum brought out 73 young people who said, hey, I'm going through this. And our message was, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. And we were able to connect them with Child Protective Services, and those 73 cases were substantiated. Then we were able to take those outcomes of those individuals based on the curriculum that we offered, and we went to the Indiana State Legislature, where my father was able to pass a piece of legislation that made it mandatory for every school district in the state of Indiana for an hour to be able to have those conversations and those curriculum to protect children. And so it is something I'm very passionate about, because my wife's desire, and many survivors who go through that, their sole purpose and their therapy is to be able to make sure no one else goes through that and other people understand they're not alone. And we were able to make that difference. On a national level, we hope to be able to be engaged in those types of pieces of legislation also, and to be able to make a difference in the community.
Right. You know, that is something that's so shocking in our community, that does exist. Gary Gurman, who's part of our virtual audience, just put out a letter to parents in Porter County warning them about the e-learning environment. He's had a number of complaints come towards his office with people that are trying to get into the e-learning environment to
Correct.
be predators on these poor kids that are trying to learn. And so it is really to know that there are efforts to try to get around this, and if they are found guilty, that that they are going to look at serving time, and justice is going to be served, because this is horrible. You affect a child's future. And as your wife and any survivor can tell you, that stays with them for the rest of their life.
And I know for a fact Gary's on the front lines. I just sat at a meeting with him on cybersecurity, and the issue that is near and dear to his heart is protecting children. And we want to be able to educate people. So when he puts a letter out that to the participants in the school district, what he's doing is he's educating parents and he's educating kids to have those conversations. And the greatest lesson that I learned was from David Kapp, and I won't perpetuate this, but what our parents warned us about is when you went to the park, you didn't talk to strangers, right? And now in the generation of the internet, predators, their park is the internet, where children are hanging out in those social networking apps and devices where kids are where predators are hanging out. So we have to do our very best as elected officials and people who are protecting children to educate them and educate parents, for them to understand where children are gathering online, predators are figuring out how to lure them and how to prospectively have them as prey. So you don't want to have the finish line that they're prosecuted. You want to prevent that through education. I think Gary's doing a phenomenal job of that.
Yeah.
And numbers have gone up, and he's statistically with reported cases based on the e-learning and people being at home.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to that because that's some issues. But what I'd like to talk about is take a sidestep here and talk about your campaign a bit. I mean, you talked to us about your call to duty as public service, but this campaign is kind of interesting because you were, I mean, before you had a small, well, relatively small area. Now you have 2.25 counties, so to speak. You've got Lake, Porter, and Michigan City, part of LaPorte County. Talk to us about what that was like. You know, you're a Hammond guy, and now you are a Beyond region guy.
Right.
So let's take us step by step, and I know you met new people out in LaPorte and Porter County. And talk to us about what you found out, what their worries are, what they would like into DC and represent them on.
So at the township, I represented 180,000 people, and one of the reasons that we were able to get through the primary is because I represented more people than anyone else within that primary. And that kind of went unnoticed, but I represent Hammond, Whiting, East Chicago, Highland, and Munster, which is a socially and economically very diverse swath of Lake County. And I believe that that's very applicable when you talk about Lake and Porter and LaPorte County. So first and foremost, I do a lot more traveling. And if 8094 and the tollway gets backed up, then I'm 10 or 15 minutes late for something. But you know, people want their interests represented, right? And we're in a very divisive time, and I get that. But for the most part, from what I am understanding is all of us, wherever I go, people want to be able to get through this pandemic, protect their families, and make sure that we have a national strategy for recovery. And a national strategy that will put us back online to make sure that we're trusting science and we're doing everything we can to reduce the amount of numbers of people who are infected. Lake and Porter and LaPorte County were obviously on the increase, and everyone should be very aware of that and take the special precautions. And so I think that the priorities are making sure that government is working in this regard, making sure people have access to health care, making sure people have access to mental health, not taking people's health care away that have sacrificed or given up pay increases to be able to have the plan that they have, specifically the steel workers and other individuals who have given up quality or pay increases in order to have the health care that they have, and having a public option. And making sure that there's access in all communities. What we have witnessed is making sure that the black and brown populations within Lake County, they have been most susceptible to COVID-19. We can't have a knee-jerk reaction to that. You know, the pandemic may not go away. We have to be able to make sure that there's access, people are getting taken care of, and that there are preventative measures being taken. And when the vaccine comes out, that we're rolling that out accordingly and we're able to protect people. And then employment. People, first and foremost, we want to make sure that on my plan that we invest in an infrastructure bill. What I mean by that is making sure that Washington, D.C. puts an infrastructure bill that invests in our roads and our bridges and our airports and our ports so that people can go back to work and we can flourish. And when we do that, that we have a Buy American provision, that we're using American steel in those products to be able to protect our economic driver of an engine, which is the steel industry. And when we do that and we reinvest in our roads and bridges, then we get out of the way and allow private businesses to invest, to be able to do what they do best. And that is to be able to develop commerce and to put businesses together, so that puts people back to work. So all of those things are extremely important, but the quality of life is extremely important. Protecting our lakeshore, making sure that we have a clean environment when it comes to air and water, and making sure, this is a big subject that came up yesterday in Chesterton. We had the young Democrats of Lake and Porter County. And it doesn't matter if it's Democrats, Republicans, or independents. Young people are really thirsting for making sure that we don't have a brain drain here in Northwest Indiana.
Yeah.
So making sure that we protect the lakeshore, making sure that we continue the investment of lowering our carbon and climate control by making sure the double tracking and the extension of the South Shore is a project that we have to fulfill. Young people don't want to own cars. They want to be able to go to work, ride their bike, and eliminate that. And what they're doing is not only reducing their costs and their quality of life, but they believe they're contributing to the environment and for a better environment. And so we have to be able to allow them to do that. You know, we also, I think, is extremely important, public safety. Wherever I go, I talk about the city of Gary, because I believe that's a big component of who we are. And so we have to make sure, as a member of Congress, we're bringing resources in a partnership with the city of Gary, that not only are we allowing for removing obstacles to make sure that they have the resources for public safety, but also economic development. And something that I want to work on with the administration and the city council is closing the digital divide. Now that students are e-learning, you have to make sure it's a level playing field, that all students have access to 5G or broadband or internet. And so when our communities that are industrialized or older communities don't have that infrastructure, we have to do everything we can to be able to put that in and work with corporate partners and the federal government to make sure that that comes to fruition. So all of those things are extremely important. The double tracking is extremely important in Michigan City and Valpo, and the quality of life and the environment, and making sure that they have smart growth, right? The federal government contributes to sewers and waters and everything that's being developed in those communities, and they need partners. They need to partner with the federal government to make sure we're investing in their community so they can have smart growth. And ultimately, that's a little bit of what we're seeing every single day.
Yeah, and one of the things that you kept reiterating, and the effect that COVID-19 has had on all of us, the nation as the earth as a whole, is that we're finding things that we probably should have taken care of before, that, you know, preparing for a pandemic or preparing for e-learning at home. And it's kind of interesting now, we're taking hindsight and going back and correcting those things, which is that it's great, but it's the same with our energy policy, you know. And Gary and I are old enough to remember the oil embargo back in the early 70s. And, you know, we kept on saying the nation needs a sustainable energy policy. And it never happened. I mean, it was bits and pieces, but it really never happened. And it seems like every time there is a crisis, it affects oil prices. Gary and I remember going in lines that were, often 3 blocks long just to get a tank of gas, or going to the gas station. And to revisit that again is just, oh boy. So talking about energy and how it's affected us historically for decades. What are your views on renewable energy and making us less dependent on fossil fuels?
So the renewable energy, my philosophy is exactly where you would think I would go. Just making sure we remember the American worker and our manufacturing base. So when we talk about solar and we talk about wind, making sure that we're using American steel. I had the opportunity, and I'm not going to go too off into the woods with this, but I had the opportunity to visit, I think it's Lake Lynn or Lake View, which is right outside of Lafayette, the windmill farm. And, you know, NIPSCO is developing 5 new windmills that are 5 times the size of the windmills that are there. So they're investing in renewable energy currently. And the farmers are, not only is it wind, but it's also solar. And, you know, the farmers are doing well by renting out their land, by diversifying their income based on, you know, the yields that they're getting and what's going on in China, which is a whole nother subject. But they're able to diversify their revenue coming in when they lease their land to these farms. Secondly, it's putting people to work, making sure that we're using union labor, electricians, carpenters, millwrights, laborers when we're putting that together. So our renewable energy plan, we have to be able to look at electric for electric cars, but we also have to remember the oil industry. And so what we want is we want cleaner air and cleaner water, but oil isn't going to go away anytime soon. And there's a lot of individuals who work at BP Amoco who are very concerned when we talk about that, how they're going to provide food and continue to have a job and a pension and health insurance. And so as we wean off of that, we have to do it in a way that trains people for the next generation of jobs. But more importantly, understand that there's a global market that we have to be able to protect, and the supply chains are issues now, and all of those things. So the renewable energy plan, what I want to make sure on is making sure we're protecting the American worker, and of course being selfish, workers within the 1st District, and that we're using American steel, and that we're weaning off of those different alternatives, or what we currently use, in order to have cleaner air, cleaner water, and be more efficient.
So really, if we're going to go down that route, making sure these are American products that we're using.
Correct.
Solar panels and
that we're manufacturing.
That we are manufacturing.
Correct.
As opposed to, which
importing them.
Exactly, which majority of them are now. Moving on to another subject before we start wrapping up here, because we're running out of time here. One of the underlying problems that COVID has kind of covered over, if you will, has been growing in Porter County and Lake County, and you did mention mental health, and this usually tags along with mental health, is the substance abuse problem that we have. Porter County has been absolutely plagued by overdose deaths and substance abuse, and it's because it is an affluent area. What attracts that? Where there's money, you are going to have a chain of coming in. Can you talk to us about your view as when you do take that seat as a congressman? What can you do to help curb that problem and support some of the people like Gary and Dave Reynolds that have boots on the ground to help them combat the problem?
So for years I've heard of the legendary stories of Dave Reynolds being on the front lines of the epidemic of opiates. He's done videos, he's utilized people who have been in prison and helped turn people's lives around by giving them opportunities. He shared with me, as someone who's a former inmate who is now guiding people through that. And so, today's Monday. So Saturday, the North Township Trustee's office, my office, partnered up with, I believe, the Gary Reduce Harm program, and other agencies that help families who are afflicted by the epidemic of opiates. And we had a Narcan training. So the Narcan training is a Band-Aid, right? And a lot of people don't understand what that does. Is it really gives someone, a family, a second chance of someone who's afflicted by an addiction. It is at some point their brain cannot control when they need opioids or heroin. It is a craving that they can't control. And so we have been on the front lines a lot of that at the North Township Trustees. So I'm going to drill down on exactly what a member of Congress can do. A member of Congress can make sure that they help Dave Reynolds and Gary by making sure HIDTA has the proper funding, which is the High Intense Drug Task Force, which there's only 2 in the state of Indiana, and it covers 5 counties, and it's very impactful. And Sheriff Dave Reynolds and Gary are very engaged in that. It gives the resources to law enforcement to be able to manage the most traveled through traffic areas of 8094. We are the crossroads of America, to be able to protect our communities from the trafficking of drugs. Then what we have to do is we really have to focus on preventative. So Narcan is one thing. So with the task force, you want to make sure that they have the resources and the support of the federal government to be able to take care of that. Then you have to be able to talk about recovery and support recovery units. And when we talk about healthcare, we have to understand in Lake and Porter County, there's only 53 beds of recovery units that you can stay for 30 days. That's a very limited amount of space. And just making sure that individuals know that there are recovery aspects where they can go to local police departments. There's a Perry program where the Griffith Police Department, the Highland Police Department, and the Munster Police Department have a dedicated policeman 24 hours a day, that if you walk in and you're afflicted through and going through addiction, that they will help you find a recovery unit to be able to help you get through that. And so those are important resources that we have. And as a member of Congress going to Washington, D.C., I want to make sure that we are conscious of that, that the numbers are rising. And the holiday season is something that excels that. And so those numbers are going to get well,
with
right?
the finances the way they
Correct.
are in COVID, it's going to be
Yes.
even more hard.
So it'll be a challenge, and as a North Township trustee currently, we're going to do everything we can to work with the organizations that are on the front lines of that every single day.
Well, man, this has been a wealth of information, Frank. Boy, we appreciate you coming on the show. Before we leave, why don't you talk to us, because this is going to be a change for you personally, huge change. if everything goes well, but this is 2020, anything can happen, you know that, right?
Correct. I'm aware.
So,
we're not leaving anything
yeah.
for uncertainty. We're working extremely hard,
Yeah.
but yes.
So tell us about what you're doing to prep personally. Now, we know what you're doing professionally. What is, tell us about your family, how you guys are getting ready for you to take upon this big task.
So we always have to say this. First, we're working extremely hard to make sure we connect with the voters and that our message is out there and that we are able to get enough votes to win. Then secondly, the prep is like anyone else would be going through that, just making sure my family understands my 2 daughters are in a good place, making sure that we have they hit the ground running with staffing, make sure that we would be able to transition into going back and forth to Washington, D.C. and having a firm grasp of the issues at hand, like the question you asked, what have I learned from my constituency when I go back, and just staying centered, making sure that I understand that I'm a dad, that I'm Truman's owner, and that I'm a husband, and I have obligations and responsibilities, and balancing my time, because it's going to be very luring to be completely consumed by what our nation is facing. Mm-hmm. And I've got to be able to make time for, obviously, my daughters and my wife, and make sure that I'm present in their lives. And so the prep is, just if someone was starting a new business that would be completely consumed, there's always that trap of thinking it's that the family will understand. Well, you've got to be able to make time for your family, and ultimately it's my responsibility to make sure we balance our priorities, that we are paying attention to my 2 daughters and my wife
and the dog
in that order.
Yes, in that order. We often forget public servants what they have to sacrifice personally with their family lives. The president has a benefit of bringing his family with him to the White House, but a lot of people don't understand. Representatives or senators don't necessarily get that luxury. Some do, some don't. And I just want everyone to know out there what sacrifices you are continuing to do, even after you leave the township position and take upon this great task upon you. And boy, we wish you the best. You and your family, your dog, Truman.
Much. Thank you.
Make sure he's well taken care of before you leave.
And I just want to say I appreciate both of you and your kindness and being flexible with me today, and thank you for what you do. There is a absolute need for civil and well-rounded conversations like this that enable us to use this as a platform to talk about what we do, and being able to talk about addiction, being able to talk about protecting children, and utilizing your talents and skills and your resources. Again, to flip it, your time is valuable, and your money and what you're investing in this, but you do have an audience all the way to New Zealand that people are paying attention, and there's a value to that, and you should take great pride in taking the time to put this together so that people can learn about the different aspects of our community that are there to help them.
Yeah, it's thing is that Kelly and I always look at it. There's a lot of people that do provide good news, and but what we want to make sure is people know that there's hope out there, because you can provide good news, but we try to let people know that, and like there's a person like Frank Mrvan going to Washington on our behalf, that there's people like Victor Garcia at the food bank, there's people at the Habitat for Humanity that are there to help people, and the more we could do that, the better, and that's where we feel like we've accomplished. Boy, I tell you, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking time, because I know we talk to your staff and they're like, yeah, Frank's phone is like dead. He's got so many people calling him. So we appreciate that. We understand what you're going through, and thank you and all the public servants like you that represent us and go day to day making sure that our lives are kept even, keel, and safe.
Thank you.
That's important.
Appreciate
it's
this
important to all
opportunity.
of us.
And
Thank
tell
you.
your beautiful wife we said hello.
I will do so.
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
And with that, we'll wrap up, and we'd like to thank our virtual audience out there. I think
Thank you, Judy.
Judy, and let's see who else. We have Angelique
Angie
and
and
Jane. Is that Jane? You're Jane?
Jane would be my wife.
Ah, well, hello, Jane. So we'd like to thank you all for participating. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up and say goodbye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.